The first transmission arrived on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the deep space monitoring station orbiting Mars. Dr. Sarah Chen nearly spilled her coffee when the alien frequencies lit up her screens like a Christmas tree. 20 years of listening to cosmic background radiation, and suddenly the universe decided to talk back. This can't be right, she muttered, adjusting her equipment. The signal was strong, clear, and definitely artificial. More importantly, it was trying to communicate in broken English. Human, help, please. The words came through distorted but unmistakable. We dying, need strong ones. Within hours, every government on Earth knew about the transmission. The Global Defense Council convened an emergency session while Sarah worked frantically to improve the signal quality. By evening, the message was crystal clear, and it painted a terrifying picture. The Zalari Confederation, a peaceful alliance of 12 species spanning 40 star systems, was under attack. An aggressive race called the Drakari had emerged from the galactic rim, consuming entire worlds with their massive war fleets. The Zalari had tried everything: diplomacy, defensive strategies, even guerrilla warfare. Nothing worked. Their advanced technology meant little against an enemy that fought with pure savage brutality. We have studied your species, the Zalari ambassador, Keth Vor, explained through the quantum communicator. His image flickered on the screen, showing a tall, graceful being with silver skin and large, desperate eyes. Your history shows remarkable adaptability in warfare, what you call thinking outside the box. We need this creativity. Our people are logical, methodical. The Drakari are chaos incarnate, and we cannot match their unpredictability. The world leaders were skeptical. Humanity had only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, and their ships were primitive compared to Zalari technology. But Kethvor had done his homework. You have something we lack, he continued. Your species has survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and countless disasters through sheer stubborn determination. You adapt, improvise, overcome. These are not common traits in the galaxy. Most species achieve peace and prosperity, then lose their edge. Humans have never lost their edge. President Martinez of the United Earth government leaned forward. What exactly are you asking for? Military advisors, tactical consultants, perhaps some of your special forces units. We can provide technology, ships, weapons far beyond your current capabilities. We need your minds, your warrior spirit. The debate raged for days. Some argued that humanity wasn't ready for galactic warfare. Others worried about the risks of alien technology. But when satellite images arrived showing entire Zalari worlds reduced to ash, the decision became clear. Admiral Rebecca Stone, the most decorated military officer in human history, stood before the assembly. Gentlemen, ladies, we have a choice. We can hide in our corner of the galaxy and hope they never find us, or we can help our new friends and learn what we're really capable of among the stars. The vote was unanimous. Within weeks, volunteers poured in from every military force on Earth. Special operations veterans, tactical geniuses, combat engineers, and psychological warfare experts all stepped forward. They called it Operation Longshot, humanity's first interstellar military deployment. But as the volunteers trained with captured Zalari technology, reports from the front lines grew worse. The Drakari weren't just conquering territory. They were exterminating entire species for sport. Billions of innocent beings had already died. Sarah Chen, now promoted to lead the communication effort, received increasingly desperate messages from Zalari refugees. The hive mind of Korath fell yesterday, one transmission reported. 3 billion lives lost in 6 hours. The Drakari don't take prisoners. They don't negotiate. They simply consume. Admiral Stone gathered her team of 500 elite human warriors. They came from every nation, every background, but they shared one thing: an absolute refusal to let bullies win. Tank commanders from Texas, ninja specialists from Japan, survival experts from Alaska, urban warfare veterans from Detroit, and counterterrorism operatives from a dozen countries. I won't lie to you, Stone addressed them in the massive hangar where sleek alien fighters waited. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting an enemy we've never seen. The Zalari are counting on us to think of something they haven't tried. No pressure. Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 different Earth conflicts, raised his hand. Ma'am, with respect, when has impossible ever stopped us before? The room erupted in laughter and cheers. These were humans who had stormed beaches under machine gun fire, who had cleared buildings room by room. who had survived in deserts and jungles and frozen wastelands. They thrived on impossible odds. As the first human ships prepared to launch, loaded with Earth's finest warriors and equipped with technology beyond imagination, Kethvor sent a final message to Dr. Chen. "Thank you," his translation came through. "We know this is a great risk for your young species, but we have studied human history extensively. When humans decide to fight, they don't just win battles. They change the nature of warfare itself. The Drakari have never faced anything like you." Sarah smiled grimly as she watched the fleet disappear into hyperspace. "They have no idea what they've just unleashed," she whispered to herself. The war was about to become very different indeed. The Drakari had spent millennia crushing civilized species who fought by rules and logic. They were about to meet a species that treated rules as suggestions and logic as just one tool among many. Humanity was going to war, and the galaxy would never be the same. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, where the Zalari had established their final defensive line. Admiral Stone stared at the tactical display, counting over 3,000 alien vessels arranged in perfect geometric formations. It was beautiful, orderly, and completely wrong for the kind of fight they were about to face. "Impressive," muttered Colonel Jake Harrison, Stone's tactical advisor. "Looks like they're ready for a parade, not a war." The Zalari command ship, a magnificent crystal structure the size of a city, moved to intercept them. Within hours, Stone found herself in a conference room that looked more like an art gallery than a military briefing center. Everything was smooth curves and soft lighting, designed for beings who had known peace for centuries. "Fleet Commander," Zethnal gestured to the holographic display showing their formations. His movements were graceful, almost dance-like. "We have positioned our forces according to optimal defensive matrices. Our shields can withstand their primary weapons, and our return fire should inflict maximum casualties while minimizing our own losses." Stone studied the display, then looked around the room at her human officers. She saw the same expression on every face, polite confusion mixed with growing concern. "Commander," she said carefully, "where are your scouts? Your advanced reconnaissance?" "We have sensor networks throughout the system, very advanced. They can detect approaching vessels from several light hours away. But no mobile reconnaissance? No prowling units behind enemy lines?" Zethnal's silver features showed confusion. "Why would we place our ships in enemy territory? That would be illogical, wasteful." Captain Sarah Murphy, formerly of the Irish Rangers, stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, how do you gather intelligence on enemy movements, their tactics, their weaknesses?" "Our computers analyze their attack patterns and calculate optimal responses." The humans exchanged glances. Stone cleared her throat. "Commander, I'd like to see recordings of their previous attacks if you have them." The hologram shifted, showing the fall of 3 different Zalari worlds. Stone watched in growing horror, not at the destruction, but at the Zalari response. Every single defensive action was textbook perfect and utterly predictable. They formed neat battle lines, fired in coordinated volleys, and retreated in orderly fashion when overwhelmed. The Drakari, meanwhile, fought like rabid wolves. Their ships moved in chaotic swarms, diving and weaving through Zalari formations. They ignored casualties, rammed damaged vessels into enemy lines, and seemed to take perverse joy in the destruction. "They're not trying to win efficiently," Stone realized aloud. "They're trying to win dramatically. This isn't military strategy for them, it's entertainment." Major Chen Li, a specialist in asymmetric warfare, nodded grimly. "Classic shock tactics. They're not just conquering territory, they're breaking morale, making the enemy afraid to even fight back." Zethnal looked puzzled. "But their tactics are clearly inferior. Our casualty ratios should favor us significantly." "Commander," Stone said gently, "casualty ratios don't matter if you lose every single battle. You're fighting by rules they don't recognize." She turned to her staff. "I want full tactical analysis of every engagement. Look for patterns the computers missed. Murphy, I want you to study their ship movements. Treat them like you're tracking terrorists in urban terrain. Harrison, Analyze their target selection. Why do they hit some worlds and ignore others? Over the next 3 days, the humans worked alongside Zalari technicians, digging into data the aliens had collected but never truly examined. The picture that emerged was disturbing. "They're not random," Captain Murphy reported. "The Drakari hit systems with high populations first, but they specifically target cultural centers. Universities, art galleries, research stations. They're not just killing bodies, they're murdering civilizations." Major Chen Li had even worse news. Their ship movements follow pack hunting patterns. They probe defenses with small groups, then call in the main force to exploit weaknesses. But here's the kicker. They're learning from each battle, getting better at countering Zalari tactics. Stone studied the data for hours, then called together both human and Zalari officers. "We need to completely change how this war is being fought," she announced. "The Drakari expect you to fight like civilized beings. That's exactly what we're not going to do." The plan she outlined was simple in concept, revolutionary in execution. Instead of one massive defensive fleet, they would break into dozens of small mobile units. Instead of protecting fixed positions, they would become raiders and guerrilla fighters. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet directly, they would target supply lines, isolated units, and command structures. Zethnal was horrified. "But Admiral, this violates every principle of space warfare. How can we protect our worlds if our fleet is scattered?" "Commander, your worlds are dying because your fleet is concentrated. The Drakari punch through your defenses because they know exactly where you'll be and how you'll react." Stone pulled up a tactical display. "We're going to be everywhere and nowhere. When they attack a world, they'll find our ships behind them, cutting off their escape. When they chase us, we'll vanish into asteroid fields and nebulae. When they think they know where we are, we'll hit them somewhere else entirely." The Zalari officers looked at each other with expressions that clearly said the humans had gone insane. But Zethnal had studied human history too. "This is how you defeated the German U-boats in your Second World War," he said slowly. "And how your American forces fought in Vietnam. And how your special forces operate today." "Exactly. We're going to make space itself our ally. Every asteroid field becomes a hiding place. Every nebula becomes an ambush site. Every moon becomes a supply depot." Stone's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "The Drakari think they're apex predators. Time to show them what real predators look like." The transformation began immediately. Human advisors were assigned to every Zalari ship, teaching alien crews to think like insurgents instead of soldiers. Zalari technology was adapted for stealth and mobility instead of raw firepower. Most importantly, the entire command structure was rebuilt around flexibility and initiative instead of rigid hierarchy. Within a week, the first human Zalari hybrid units were ready for deployment. They slipped out of the main fleet under cover of a simulated maintenance operation, disappearing into the void like ghosts. The Drakari were coming, expecting another glorious slaughter. Instead, they were about to learn why humans had never met a fair fight they couldn't make unfair. The Drakari fleet arrived at Kepler 442 like a swarm of angry hornets, their black ships bristling with weapons and scarred from countless battles. War leader Krath Vex stood on his command throne, savoring the moment before another easy victory. His species had conquered 43 worlds in this sector, each one falling within hours of their arrival. "Deploy attack formation Skull Render," he growled to his subordinates. "Standard extermination protocol. I want their population centers reduced to ash before the secondary sun set." The Drakari vessels spread out in their typical chaotic swarm, diving toward the inner planets where Zalari civilians huddled in underground shelters. But something was wrong. The expected wall of defending ships wasn't there. Instead, scattered groups of vessels fled in apparent panic, their formations breaking apart. "Cowards," spat Krath Vex. "They run before we even fire a shot. This will be even easier than expected." His ships gave chase, hunting down the fleeing Zalari vessels with predatory glee. But as they pursued their prey deeper into the system, Krath Vex began to feel uneasy. Something felt different about this hunt. Captain Murphy watched the Drakari fleet through her ship's sensors, hidden inside the debris field of an old mining operation. Around her, a mixed crew of humans and Zalari worked with deadly efficiency. The aliens had learned quickly. 3 weeks of human training had taught them to move like shadows instead of dancing like angels. "They're taking the bait," she whispered into her communicator. "All units prepare for Operation Sharkbite." The fleeing Zalari ships led the Drakari deeper into a carefully prepared trap. What looked like panicked retreat was actually a complex choreographed maneuver, drawing the enemy fleet into a maze of asteroid fields and sensor-blocking nebulae. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now commanding a fast attack vessel crewed by Zalari volunteers, watched his sensors as enemy ships approached his hiding spot. "Wait for it," he muttered, remembering urban warfare tactics from Earth. "Let them get closer." When the Drakari ships passed within a few thousand kilometers, the trap sprung. Hidden vessels emerged from every direction, not to fight a pitched battle, but to deliver quick, devastating strikes before vanishing again. But this wasn't random hit-and-run warfare. The humans had spent weeks studying Drakari psychology, and every attack was precisely calculated. They didn't target the strongest ships. They went after communication vessels, supply ships, and most importantly, the Drakari leader's personal vessels. Krathvex watched in growing rage as his beautiful swarm formations were torn apart by enemies that refused to stand and fight. "Where are they?" he roared as another of his supply ships exploded. "Stand and face us, cowards." But the humans weren't interested in honor or glory. They were interested in winning. Major Chen Li coordinated the overall strategy from a mobile command post hidden deep in an asteroid field. Her screen showed dozens of small engagements across the system, each one carefully timed to maximum psychological impact. "Target their fuel depot ships first," she ordered. "Then their food supplies. Make them worry about basic survival instead of conquest." The Drakari had never faced an enemy that attacked their logistics instead of their warriors. For a species that thrived on glorious combat, having to worry about food and fuel was deeply demoralizing. Colonel Harrison led a specialized unit tasked with something even more demoralizing: capturing Drakari prisoners. Not for interrogation, but for a much more subtle purpose. "Remember," he told his mixed human Zalari team, "we want them alive and unharmed. This only works if they can report back to their fleet." The captured Drakari warriors were treated with unprecedented kindness, given medical care, good food, and comfortable quarters. Then they were released with a message for their war leader. When the confused prisoners returned to their fleet, they brought stories that shook the Drakari to their core. The enemy hadn't tortured them or enslaved them. Instead, they had been treated better than most Drakari treated their own subordinates. "It's psychological warfare," Captain Murphy explained to a group of Zalari officers who couldn't understand the strategy. "The Drakari expect their enemies to be either weak or just as savage as they are. By treating prisoners well, we're showing them something they've never seen: strength combined with mercy. It makes them question everything they believe about warfare." The captured prisoners also brought back technical intelligence that would have taken months to gather otherwise. Human interrogation techniques, refined by centuries of dealing with difficult subjects, extracted information so skillfully that the Drakari didn't even realize they were being debriefed. Within days, human analysts had complete blueprints of Drakari ship designs, tactical doctrines, and command structures. More importantly, they had psychological profiles of key enemy leaders. Admiral Stone studied the intelligence reports with growing satisfaction. "They're pack hunters," she concluded, "but they're also pack thinkers. Take out the alpha, and the rest will either flee or turn on each other." The next phase of the operation was surgical in its precision. Instead of random attacks, human-led units began specifically targeting Drakari command ships. Not to destroy them, but to isolate them from their fleets. Krathvex found himself cut off from most of his forces, his communication ships destroyed, his sensors jammed by devices he didn't understand. For the first time in his life, the war leader felt something he had never experienced before: genuine fear. "Regroup," he ordered his remaining ships. "Form defensive positions around my vessel." But the humans had anticipated this move. As the Drakari ships clustered together for mutual protection, they found themselves surrounded by what looked like empty space. Then the space began to move. The Zalari had learned to use their advanced shielding technology in ways their creators never intended. Instead of just deflecting weapons, the shields could bend light, making their ships nearly invisible. Combined with human stealth tactics, they had become ghosts in the void. The final blow came when Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, a former Army Ranger, led a boarding party directly onto Krath Vex's command ship. The Drakari had never developed effective anti-boarding procedures because they had never imagined an enemy bold enough to board their vessels. Santos and her team of humans and Zalari moved through the enemy ship like phantoms, avoiding confrontation and targeting critical systems. Within an hour, they had disabled the ship's weapons, engines, and life support systems. When Krath Vex was brought before Admiral Stone under a flag of truce, his eyes showed a mixture of rage and newfound respect. "You fight without honor," he snarled. Stone smiled grimly. "We fight to win. Your people are excellent warriors, but terrible soldiers. There's a difference." The war leader looked confused, so Stone continued. "Warriors fight for glory, for personal honor, for the joy of combat. Soldiers fight for their people, for their homes, for their future. Warriors can be defeated by better warriors. Soldiers can only be defeated by better soldiers. And we've been soldiers for a very long time." The psychological impact of losing their most successful war leader rippled through the Drakari fleet. For the first time in their species' history, they retreated from a system they hadn't conquered. But Admiral Stone knew this was only the beginning. The Drakari would return with new tactics and greater numbers. The question was whether humanity and its allies would be ready for them. News of the Drakari defeat at Kepler 442 spread across the galaxy like wildfire. For the first time in living memory, the unstoppable war machine had been stopped. In the depths of space, on refugee ships and hidden colonies, billions of beings dared to hope again. But Admiral Stone knew better than to celebrate. She stood in the war room aboard the Zalari command ship, studying intelligence reports that painted a terrifying picture. The Drakari weren't just regrouping, they were evolving. "They're adapting faster than we expected," reported Colonel Harrison, his face grim as he analyzed the latest reconnaissance data. 3 different fleets have changed their tactics completely. They're using smaller units now, avoiding our ambush zones, and they've started targeting our supply lines. Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as the fleet's chief intelligence analyst, highlighted several star systems on the tactical display. It gets worse. They've started recruiting mercenaries from conquered species, beings who know our new tactics because they've been fighting alongside us. The room fell silent. The humans had taught the galaxy how to fight the Drakari, but in doing so, they had also taught the Drakari how to fight back. Fleet Commander Zeth Null, his silver features etched with worry, gestured to the display. 3 of our liberated worlds have gone dark. No communications, no refugees escaping. Complete silence. Stone felt a chill run down her spine. That's not the Drakari's usual style. They like their conquest to be loud and terrifying. Captain Murphy, monitoring communications from her reconnaissance vessel, suddenly straightened. "Admiral, I'm picking up a transmission. It's coming from one of the dark systems." The message that came through was unlike anything they had heard before. Instead of the usual Drakari war screams and threats, this was calculated, cold, and spoken in perfect Zalari. "Greetings, Admiral Stone of Earth." The voice belonged to something that had once been Zalari, but there was something fundamentally wrong with it. "I am Strategic Mind Vekthar, formerly of the Zalari Third Fleet. I wish to compliment you on your innovative tactics." Stone's blood ran cold. "A Zalari working with the Drakari?" "Not working with them," the voice continued. "Leading them. You see, Admiral, your species taught us something valuable about adaptation, but adaptation works both ways. We have learned from your methods and we have improved upon them." The transmission included tactical data that made Stone's worst nightmares seem optimistic. The Drakari had found Zalari collaborators, beings who understood both the old Zalari military doctrine and the new human influence tactics. Worse, they were using captured human technology to create hybrid weapon systems that combined Drakari aggression with human innovation. Major Chen Li studied the data with growing alarm. "They're not just copying our tactics, they're anticipating them. Look at these fleet movements. They're setting traps for our trap setters." The next few weeks became a deadly game of military evolution. Every time the human Zalari forces developed new tactics, the enemy adapted. Every innovation was countered, every advantage neutralized. But Stone had expected this. During her years of military service on Earth, She had learned that the best armies weren't those with the best weapons or tactics. They were those that could change faster than their enemies. Gentlemen, ladies, she addressed her mixed staff of humans and Zalari, we're about to do something that goes against every military manual ever written. We're going to abandon our proven tactics and create entirely new ones. The plan she outlined was radical even by human standards. Instead of fighting a conventional guerrilla war, they would become something unprecedented in galactic history, a truly joint species military force. The Drakari are adapting to human tactics and Zalari technology, Stone explained. But they're still thinking in terms of single-species warfare. What if we stopped being humans advising Zalari and became something entirely new? The transformation began with the most basic element of military organization, the squad. Instead of human advisors working with Zalari crews, they created integrated units where species differences became tactical advantages. Zalari computational abilities were paired with human intuition. Human aggression was tempered by Zalari precision. Most importantly, they developed a hybrid command structure that could think both logically and creatively at the same time. Sergeant Rodriguez found himself co-commanding a unit with a Zalari named Keth Lin. Their ship's crew included 3 humans, 4 Zalari, and 2 refugees from conquered worlds who brought their own unique perspectives. This shouldn't work, Keth Lin observed, as they prepared for their first mission under the new doctrine. 11 different ways of thinking about the same problem. Rodriguez grinned. On Earth we have a saying, too many cooks spoil the broth. But sometimes you need a really complicated recipe. The hybrid units were deployed against a Drakari fleet that had adopted human-style hit-and-run tactics. But when the enemy tried to spring their carefully prepared ambush, they found that their prey had become something they couldn't understand. Human Zalari units moved in patterns that seemed random but weren't. They used technology in ways that violated both human doctrine and Zalari logic. Most confusingly, they seemed to anticipate the enemy's adaptations before those adaptations were even implemented. Strategic mind Vec Thar watched his carefully planned trap fail completely, his forces scattered by enemies that fought like nothing he had studied. Impossible, he muttered, analyzing the battle data. They're violating their own tactical patterns, but that was exactly the point. The integrated units didn't follow human tactics or Zalari doctrine. They had created something entirely new. Captain Santos, now commanding a deep strike vessel with a crew drawn from 6 different species, demonstrated the new approach during a raid on a Drakari supply base. Human doctrine says we should hit fast and withdraw, she explained to her mixed crew. Zalari doctrine says we should calculate optimal firing solutions and minimize casualties. Thorian doctrine says we should disable their engines first. Cree methodology suggests targeting their communication arrays. She paused, looking around at the aliens who had become her family over the past months. So we're going to do all of it at once, in an order that makes no logical sense but feels right. Trust your instincts, trust your calculations, trust your cultural knowledge, and trust each other. The raid that followed was a masterpiece of controlled chaos. Multiple species attacking the same target with completely different methodologies, but somehow working in perfect harmony. The Drakari defenders found themselves facing enemies who thought in ways that couldn't be predicted or countered. Every time they adapted to one attack pattern, 3 more emerged from entirely different cultural and tactical backgrounds. But the real revolution came when the integrated units started developing their own unique tactical language, a hybrid of human slang, Zalari precision terminology, and concepts borrowed from a dozen other species. Admiral Stone listened to combat communications that sounded like no military chatter she had ever heard. Angel 7 to base logic. We have optimal chaos on the north vector. Recommend ghost dance pattern with full honor intensity. Base logic to Angel 7 approved. Execute Wisdom Fury protocol and maintain pack harmony. The translations made no sense individually, but together they represented a new way of thinking about warfare. One that combined the best elements of every species involved. The Drakari and their collaborators found themselves fighting an enemy that had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a true multi-species military force that fought, and adapted as a single organism while maintaining the advantages of diversity. Strategic mind, Vec Thar realized too late that in teaching the galaxy to fight like humans, The humans had learned to fight like something far more dangerous, a united galaxy. The war had been raging for 8 months when Admiral Stone received the message that changed everything. It came through secure channels from Earth, carrying news that made her hands shake as she read. "Admiral," the text began, "orbital sensors have detected massive fleet movements in the galactic rim. Analysis suggests the main Drakari armada, estimated at over 50,000 vessels, is moving toward our sector. Estimated arrival time, 6 weeks." Stone stared at the numbers. 50,000 ships. The combined human Zalari forces had maybe 3,000 vessels, and that included converted civilian craft and half-destroyed ships held together with determination and spare parts. She called an emergency meeting of all senior commanders, both human and Zalari. The holographic conference room filled with worried faces from across the sector. "We've been fighting the Drakari advance forces," Stone announced without preamble. "Scouts, raiders, expeditionary fleets. The real war is about to begin." Fleet Commander Zethnal's silver features went pale. 50,000 vessels. That's their entire military might. They mean to end this war decisively. Colonel Harrison pulled up strategic analyses on the main display. "Even with our new integrated tactics, we're outnumbered 15-1. Those aren't survivable odds." But Captain Murphy, now commanding one of the most effective mixed species units, leaned forward with a thoughtful expression. "What if we're thinking about this wrong? What if those numbers are actually an advantage?" The room erupted in skeptical murmurs, but Admiral Stone held up a hand for silence. She had learned to listen when Murphy got that particular look in her eye. "Explain," Stone ordered. Murphy stood and manipulated the display, showing the projected Drakari formation. "Look at this from a logistics perspective. 50,000 ships means millions of crew members, billions of tons of supplies and coordination requirements that boggle the mind. They're not bringing an army. They're bringing an entire civilization." Major Chen Li caught on first. "And civilizations have vulnerabilities that armies don't." "Exactly." Murphy highlighted several points in the enemy formation. Food production ships, fuel refineries, manufacturing vessels, command coordination networks. They can't leave any of it behind because they're too far from home to resupply. Stone felt a familiar sensation, the moment when an impossible problem suddenly became merely difficult. They're not just bringing 50,000 warships, they're bringing 50,000 targets. The plan that emerged over the next few days was audacious even by human standards. Instead of trying to defeat the massive Drakari fleet in direct combat, they would turn the enemy's size against itself. "We're going to make them choose," Stone explained to the assembled commanders. "Fight us and lose their infrastructure, or protect their infrastructure and let us dictate the terms of engagement." The strategy required splitting their forces in ways that seemed suicidal. Small units would infiltrate the massive enemy formation, targeting not the warships but the support vessels that kept the fleet operational. But the real masterstroke came from an unlikely source. Dr. Sarah Chen, analyzing communications intercepts from the approaching fleet, discovered something that made her burst into the war room with uncharacteristic excitement. "They're not unified," she announced breathlessly. "The main fleet contains ships from dozens of conquered species, all forced to work together. And they hate each other almost as much as they hate us." Stone studied the communications data with growing interest. The Drakari had indeed brought their entire civilization to bear. But that civilization included millions of enslaved beings from conquered worlds. "Psychological warfare opportunity," she murmured. "What happens if we give these slaves a chance to fight back?" The operation that followed required every lesson the humans had learned about unconventional warfare. Small teams infiltrated the massive enemy fleet, not to plant bombs or steal technology, but to make contact with the enslaved crews aboard support vessels. Sergeant Rodriguez found himself aboard a Drakari supply ship, face to face with a group of Thorian engineers who had been forced to maintain enemy equipment for 3 years. "We've come to offer you a choice," he told them quietly. "Continue serving your masters or help us destroy them." The response was immediate and visceral. The Thorians, along with dozens of other enslaved species, had been waiting years for exactly this opportunity. But the humans didn't just offer them freedom. They offered them revenge with precision. "We don't want you to sabotage your ships randomly," Captain Santos explained to a gathering of covert resistance leaders. "We want you to sabotage them at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way to cause maximum chaos." The plan required unprecedented coordination. Thousands of enslaved beings throughout the Drakari fleet would simultaneously turn against their masters, but only when the human Zalari forces were in position to exploit the resulting confusion. Meanwhile, the visible military preparation continued. Admiral Stone's forces took defensive positions around several key systems, making it appear that they intended to fight the traditional way. The Drakari, confident in their overwhelming numbers, moved to crush what they saw as a desperate last stand. War Commander Thekmorg, the supreme leader of the Drakari Armada, stood on his flagship's command deck and savored the moment of final victory. Below him, 50,000 ships stretched to the horizon, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. "Begin the final extermination," he commanded. "Leave no world inhabited, no ship intact, no memory of resistance." But as the massive fleet moved into attack formation, the carefully orchestrated rebellion began. It started small, a fuel processing ship suddenly losing power, a communications relay experiencing mysterious static. The Drakari commanders barely noticed these minor malfunctions. In a fleet of 50,000 vessels, equipment failures were expected. Then the failures began cascading. Aboard the supply vessel Bone Crusher, Thorian engineer Vectal smiled grimly as he initiated the sabotage sequence Rodriguez had taught him. Not random destruction, but surgical precision. The ship's fusion reactors would overload in exactly 17 minutes, just long enough for the Thorians to evacuate to waiting human rescue ships, but not long enough for Drakari damage control to respond. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Enslaved Kree technicians disabled weapon manufacturing systems. Conquered Altarian pilots fed false navigation data to entire squadrons. Former Zalari scientists introduced cascading software failures into command networks. War Commander Thekmorg felt the first tremors of concern when his tactical display began showing red warning lights throughout his formation. "Status report," he barked. "Multiple system failures across the fleet, sir," his aide reported nervously. "Engineering says it's unprecedented, like the ships are turning against us." Before Thekmorg could respond, the second phase of the human plan activated. While the Drakari fleet struggled with internal sabotage, human Zalari forces struck from every direction at once, but they didn't target the warships. They targeted the chaos. Admiral Stone watched from her command vessel as perfectly timed strikes hit the Drakari fleet's most vulnerable moments. When a sabotaged fuel depot exploded, human raiders were already in position to exploit the resulting gap in their formations. When communication networks failed, integrated units struck command vessels that couldn't coordinate their defenses. The psychological impact was devastating. The Drakari had built their empire on the premise that they were apex predators, that their victims were helpless prey, but now their own ships were turning against them. Their enslaved crews fighting back, their overwhelming numbers becoming a liability instead of an advantage. "This is impossible." Thekmorg roared as another section of his fleet fell into chaos. "We have them outnumbered 15-1. His tactical advisor, a rare Drakari with actual strategic thinking ability, studied the battle displays with growing understanding. "Commander, they're not trying to outfight us. They're turning us into our own enemy." The third phase was the most audacious of all. Instead of trying to destroy the massive Drakari fleet, the human Zalari forces began capturing it. Boarding parties, led by humans but staffed with liberated slaves who knew every detail of ship layouts and security systems, swarmed onto Drakari vessels. The attackers moved through the ships like they owned them, because in many cases they had built them. Captain Murphy led one such boarding party onto a Drakari battlecruiser. Her team included former slaves from 6 different species, all eager for revenge but disciplined enough to follow her tactical guidance. "Remember," she told them as they cut through the ship's hull, "we're not here to kill everyone. We're here to take their ship and turn it against them." The battle for each vessel became a masterclass in urban warfare tactics adapted to space combat. Human soldiers trained in room-to-room fighting led alien allies who knew exactly which systems to target and which crew members might switch sides. Within hours, entire sections of the Drakari fleet had changed hands. Ships that had been part of the invasion force suddenly turned their weapons on their former allies. War Commander Thekmorg watched in horror as his magnificent armada tore itself apart. The humans hadn't just defeated his fleet. They had stolen it, corrupted it, turned it into Somisplau. The aftermath of the Great Fleet Battle left the galaxy in chaos, but it was a different kind of chaos than anyone had expected. Instead of the Drakari victory parade through conquered systems, refugee ships filled with liberated beings streamed toward safe harbors, carrying news that seemed too good to believe. Admiral Stone stood on the observation deck of her flagship, now accompanied by 24 captured Drakari vessels crewed by their former slaves. The sight should have filled her with satisfaction, but her expression remained troubled. "We won the battle," she told Colonel Harrison, who joined her at the viewport. "But we might have created an even bigger problem." Harrison nodded grimly. Intelligence reports from across the sector painted a disturbing picture. The Drakari Empire hadn't collapsed. It had fragmented into dozens of smaller factions, each one now desperate and unpredictable. Warlord Kex Voth has declared himself supreme war leader and is gathering loyalist forces, Harrison reported. At least 6 other Drakari commanders are making similar claims. They're fighting each other as much as they're fighting us. Dr. Sarah Chen entered the observation lounge, her face pale with exhaustion. It gets worse. The liberated slave populations aren't just seeking freedom. They want revenge. We're getting reports of massacres on former Drakari worlds. Stone had feared this outcome. In teaching the galaxy how to fight back against tyranny, humanity had also unleashed forces that might prove impossible to control. "Admiral," came a voice from the communication system, "you have an incoming message from Earth. Priority Alpha." The holographic image that appeared was President Martinez, but he looked older than Stone remembered, worn down by the weight of galactic warfare. "Rebecca," he said without preamble, "I need to know your honest assessment. Can this war be won? And if it can be won, what will be left afterward?" Stone considered the question carefully. Around her, the stars showed the glow of distant battles as former slaves fought their former masters. As Drakari warlords battled each other for supremacy, as entire star systems burned in the chaos of revolution. "Sir, we can win this war," she replied. "The question is whether victory will mean anything in the aftermath." Over the next several weeks, that question became the defining challenge of the conflict. The Human-Zalari Alliance found themselves fighting not just the remaining Drakari forces, but the chaos that their own success had created. Captain Murphy discovered this firsthand when her mixed species unit responded to a distress call from a former Drakari colony world. They arrived expecting to evacuate refugees, but instead found a 3-way battle between Drakari loyalists, liberated slaves seeking revenge, and civilian populations caught in the middle. "This is insane," muttered Sergeant Rodriguez as their ship dodged fire from all 3 factions. "We came here to save these people, and they're all trying to kill each other." But Murphy saw something else in the chaos, an opportunity to demonstrate what the galaxy could become if it chose cooperation over revenge. "All units, stand down weapons," she ordered. "We're going in unarmed." Her crew looked at her like she had lost her mind, but Murphy had learned to trust human instincts about seemingly impossible situations. The ship descended toward the planet's surface, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Captain Murphy of the Galactic Liberation Force. We're here to help anyone who wants to stop fighting and start rebuilding. It should have been suicide. Instead, something miraculous happened. The fighting gradually stopped as beings from all 3 factions approached the unarmed human vessel, curious about what these strange aliens were offering. Murphy stood on the ship's ramp, facing a crowd that included former Drakari soldiers, liberated slaves, and terrified civilians. Any one of them could have killed her, but something in her demeanor made violence seem not just wrong but pointless. "I know you're all angry," she said, her voice carrying across the landing field. "I know you've all suffered. I know some of you want revenge and others want safety, and others just want to go home." She gestured to her mixed crew behind her. Humans, Zalari, former Drakari slaves, and even a few reformed Drakari soldiers who had chosen to switch sides. "But look at us. 6 months ago, we were strangers from different species, different cultures, different worlds. Some of us were enemies. Now we're family, not because we're the same, but because we chose to be better than our worst impulses." The crowd listened in silence as Murphy continued. "You can keep fighting each other until this world is nothing but ash and bones. Or you can do what we did, choose to build something better." It wasn't a magical transformation. There were still angry voices, still calls for revenge, still fear and hatred on all sides. But something had shifted in the conversation. A former Drakari soldier stepped forward, his scarred hands shaking. "How do we trust each other?" he asked. "How do we forget what was done?" Murphy nodded respectfully. "You don't forget. But you can choose what to do with the memory. Use it to fuel more hatred, or use it to make sure it never happens again." Over the following days, similar scenes played out across the galaxy as human-led teams intervened in local conflicts. Not as conquerors or judges, but as mediators who had learned that the hardest battles were often fought not against external enemies, but against the darkness within. Admiral Stone watched these developments with a mixture of pride and concern. The humans were succeeding beyond their wildest expectations, but they were also being stretched thin across dozens of star systems. "We're becoming the galaxy's therapists," she observed to Fleet Commander Zethnal during one of their strategy sessions. The EO Zalari leader's silver features showed an expression that might have been amusement. "Is that such a bad thing? Your species has a talent for healing wounds that others thought permanent." But the real test came when War Commander Thek Morg himself requested a meeting under a flag of truce. The leader of the remaining Drakari loyalists wanted to negotiate, but on his own terms. Stone agreed to meet him on a neutral space station, accompanied only by a small security detail. As she faced the massive, scarred Drakari warrior across a conference table, she realized that this conversation would determine the future of galactic civilization. "You have destroyed everything we built," Thekmor growled. "Centuries of conquest reduced to chaos." Stone nodded calmly. "Your empire was built on suffering. It was always going to fall eventually. We just made it happen faster and with fewer casualties." "And what would you build in its place?" the war commander challenged. "Your humans are already spread too thin to maintain order. The galaxy will tear itself apart without strong leadership." For a moment, Stone felt the weight of the entire galaxy's future pressing down on her. Then she remembered something her grandmother had told her years ago. "Leadership isn't about being the strongest person in the room. It's about helping everyone else find their own strength." "We're not going to rule the galaxy," Stone replied. "We're going to teach it to rule itself." 2 years after the great fleet battle that shattered the Drakari Empire, Admiral Stone stood once again in a conference room. But this one was very different from the sterile Zalari command centers she had grown accustomed to. The walls showed wear marks from construction, the furniture was mismatched, and the air recycling system made an annoying humming sound that no one had figured out how to fix. It was perfect. Representatives from 43 different species sat around the circular table, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, harmonics, and spoken words that the translation systems struggled to keep up with. They were arguing as usual, but it was the kind of productive argument that led to solutions rather than violence. "The Centauri mining rights issue cannot be resolved by simply dividing the asteroids equally," insisted Delegate Vextarn, a former Drakari engineer who had become one of the most effective negotiators in the new Galactic Council. "The Thorian deep-bore techniques and Altarian refining processes need to be integrated for optimal efficiency." Dr. Sarah Chen, now serving as Earth's primary diplomatic liaison, smiled as she watched the debate. 2 years ago, these same beings were trying to kill each other. Now they're arguing about mining techniques and profit sharing. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. The galaxy-wide civil war that followed the Drakari collapse had lasted 18 months, with human-led peacekeeping forces stretched across hundreds of systems. There had been massacres, revenge killings, and several attempts to establish new empires based on the old Drakari model. But slowly, painfully, something new had emerged. Captain Murphy, now commanding a fleet of integration vessels that moved between troubled systems, had become something like a traveling diplomat. Her ship carried not weapons, but teachers, engineers, medical personnel, and most importantly, examples of successful cooperation between former enemies. The key was never trying to impose human values on alien cultures, she explained to a group of newly trained peacekeeping officers. It was showing them how their own values could be expressed in ways that didn't require destroying their neighbors. The breakthrough had come when several former Drakari worlds had voluntarily requested assistance in establishing new governments. Not human-style democracies, but systems based on their own cultural concepts of honor and strength, modified to channel aggression into productive competition rather than conquest. Sergeant Rodriguez, now a colonel and commander of the Integration Corps, had overseen the transformation of the former Drakari homeworld. Instead of trying to eliminate their warrior culture, the new system channeled it into exploration, rescue operations, and the defense of vulnerable populations. Turns out Drakari make excellent firefighters and disaster relief workers, he reported to Admiral Stone during one of their regular briefings. They still get to fight, but now they're fighting fires, floods, and famines instead of other people. The Galactic Council that eventually emerged bore little resemblance to the old Zalari Confederation or any human governmental model. It was messier, louder, and more chaotic than anything political scientists had ever imagined. It was also more stable than any previous attempt at galactic governance. "We don't try to make everyone the same," Fleet Commander Zeth Nal, now the Council's first Secretary General, explained to a visiting Earth delegation. "We just make sure everyone has a voice and everyone has to listen to each other." The Council's headquarters, built on a formerly contested world that had been devastated during the Civil War, embodied this philosophy. The architecture incorporated elements from dozens of different species, creating something that was simultaneously alien and familiar to everyone. Admiral Stone walked through the corridors, observing the daily miracle of galactic governance. A Thorian engineer worked alongside a former Drakari warrior to repair a water recycling system. Zalari mathematicians collaborated with human psychologists to develop new conflict resolution algorithms. Children from 20 different species played together in integrated schools, learning each other's languages and customs as naturally as breathing. It wasn't perfect. There were still conflicts, still prejudices, still occasional outbreaks of violence that required intervention. But the default state of the galaxy had shifted from war to peace, from fear to cooperation. "Admiral Stone," a young voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see a human child, maybe 10 years old, standing with a group of alien classmates. "Yes? Our teacher says you're the one who started all this," the child said, gesturing vaguely at the bustling interspecies community around them. "Is that true?" Stone looked at the mixed group of children, human, Zalari, Thorian, and even a young Drakari, whose parents had chosen integration over isolation. They represented something that had never existed before in galactic history, a generation that saw diversity as normal, cooperation as natural. "No," she replied honestly. "I didn't start this. We all did. Every person who chose to trust instead of fear, to cooperate instead of fight, to build instead of destroy. That's what created this." The child looked thoughtful. "So anyone can do it?" "Anyone can do it," Stone confirmed. "But it's harder than fighting. It takes more courage to trust someone than to shoot them, more strength to forgive than to take revenge, more intelligence to solve problems together than to solve them alone." As the children ran off to their next class, Stone continued her walk through the council complex. In one room, former enemies worked together to plan relief efforts for a world struck by natural disaster. In another, representatives from a dozen species debated the ethics of terraforming uninhabited planets. She paused at an observation window that looked out over the city that had grown up around the council headquarters. The skyline was a chaotic mix of architectural styles, a testament to the messy vitality of interspecies cooperation. "Admiring our work?" Colonel Harrison joined her at the window. He looked older, marked by the years of peacekeeping and nation-building. But there was a satisfaction in his expression that Stone had rarely seen during their military campaigns. "Wondering if it will last," Stone replied honestly. Harrison nodded. "The old Drakari Empire lasted 1,000 years through conquest and fear. The Zalari Confederation endured for centuries through logic and order. This," he gestured at the bustling city below, "this is held together by nothing but the choice to keep trying." "That might be stronger than conquest or logic," Stone mused. "Choices can be renewed every day. Conquest and logic are brittle. They break when stressed." As if to prove her point, alarms suddenly sounded throughout the building. Not the harsh warnings of military alert, but the organized tones of the Council's emergency response system. Stone and Harrison quickly made their way to the Crisis Management Center. "What's the situation?" Stone asked as she entered the room filled with beings from 24 species working frantically at control stations. "Massive solar flare approaching the Kepler 186 system," reported the Thorian chief of Emergency Operations. 5 inhabited worlds, total population approximately 2 billion beings. Evacuation status? Impossible. Not enough ships, not enough time. For a moment, the room fell silent as the magnitude of the crisis sank in. Then, as Stone watched, something beautiful happened. The Drakari Third Fleet can be there in 18 hours, announced one delegate. Zelari, shielding technology can protect ground. Installations, offered another. Human, disaster relief protocols can coordinate the response, added a third. Within minutes, a coordinated response plan emerged that combined technologies, resources, and expertise from across the galaxy. Ships that had been enemies 2 years earlier now raced toward the same destination, not to fight each other, but to fight a common enemy. Natural disaster. Admiral Stone smiled as she watched the operation unfold. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson humanity had to teach, that strength came not from what you could destroy, but from what you could protect. 6 months later, when Earth's historians finally got around to writing the definitive account of the Galactic War, they struggled with what to call it. It hadn't been a victory in any traditional sense. No conquered territories, no defeated enemies forced to surrender, no triumphant parades through enemy capitals. Instead, it had been something unprecedented in the annals of warfare, a conflict that had ended not with the defeat of the enemy, but with their transformation into allies. The final entry in Admiral Stone's official log read simply, "Mission accomplished. The galaxy asked for our help in learning to fight. We taught them something better, how to stop fighting and start building." Dr. Sarah Chen, now working on a comprehensive history of human-alien contact, put it differently. Humanity's greatest export to the galaxy wasn't our military technology or our tactical expertise. It was our stubborn, illogical, completely unreasonable insistence that things could always be better than they were. And in the end, that had made all the difference.